right. So, hey, thanks for stopping by, Brian, for Liberty today. We are going to be taking things in a slightly different direction over the next series of videos. And what we're really going to be working on is putting together a series of videos that's going to help libertarians, and particularly libertarian candidates running for office, to hopefully do a better job communicating with voters and giving them an idea of why they should be voting libertarian. We're going to go through different questions that libertarians are typically asked, how libertarians would solve problems that are facing our society today, why libertarian principles are a better solution to what's going on than the ideas presented by the parties that would oppose us. I say the parties that would oppose us. We're talking about the Republicans and Democrats who absolutely control the government at all levels. So we're opposing them, I guess, as opposed to them opposing us. But we're going to start by really this first video is really how to explain libertarianism. I think that's something that we all kind of struggle with as libertarians. The concept seems so simple to us. And because of that, I think that it becomes difficult for us to try and explain to other people outside of liberty who are so used to the two-party system and the way government functions today that the idea of libertarianism is such a foreign concept. The idea that society would voluntarily provide things that the government is attempting to provide by force is a concept that is very difficult to understand because we've been living under this system for so long. But when explaining libertarianism, the most important thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, the most important thing is to stop being so condescending. Stop attacking people's beliefs. Stop using terms like authoritarian and statist. These are fun little words to use when we're being annoying, virtue signaling, purity testing libertarians amongst ourselves, okay? But you are not winning anybody over to the ideals of liberty by using these kinds of insults, and you're not growing the party, and you're not spreading the message. So stop being condescending. It may seem like an easy thing to remember, especially for a candidate. Of course, I'm not going to be condescending. Of course, I'm not going to name call. But you have to remember that this applies online. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a far left, progressive, Bernie Sanders type person, but really got turned off by Bernie Sanders, not because of his politics, but because of his online supporters, the Bernie bros, as they came to be known. She just viewed them as incredibly misogynistic, condescending, constantly attacking, and that literally turned her off to a political candidate that she would otherwise completely support. So remember that when engaging people, not to be condescending, to be patient, to explain these things and understand that they are coming from a place where what you're telling them is a very foreign concept. That's very important to remember. We have to do a better job getting people to engage with us in the first place, and attacking their belief system is the furthest thing from, I mean, it seems like common sense, but I've ran for office as a libertarian twice. I'm very far from anything that would be considered a person who wants to exercise authority or initiate force against a person. I consider myself very libertarian, and I have engaged with libertarians online myself and been attacked over minor disagreements in ridiculous and condescending ways. So we have to do a better job controlling that. You have to control your message, and you have to call out your own supporters if you find that they're engaging in this kind of online behavior. That's the first step. And we're talking about running a campaign and how to explain libertarianism. The first step here is to get them to listen. And in order to get them to listen, okay, now that we've covered what should be the simplest and easiest thing, which is to not be mean to people and to not condescend, we have to focus on actually explaining libertarianism. And we have to start with what is the basic tenet of what libertarianism is, or the guiding principle of libertarianism. If you're a libertarian, you already know this, and it is the non-aggression principle. And it's a core libertarian belief, the non-aggression principle. And it simply states that we're opposed to the use of force to achieve social or political goals. And the crazy thing for me about libertarianism is that most people, when it comes to our core belief, most people agree with that belief, that it's wrong to force people to do things against their will. It doesn't get any simpler than that. It's a basic thing that we have learned since childhood, that you can't force people to behave in a certain way, that you can't initiate force. And it's a principle that at its core sets libertarians apart from the other two parties. Both Democrats and Republicans don't just support using force to achieve their social and political goals. They absolutely depend on the use of force. So it makes us so different than other parties that it's almost hard for people to understand. And the interesting thing about that for me is, and I think one of the things that confuses a lot of people about libertarianism, and this is an area of conversation that you can have with potential voters that can help them probably feel a little bit more comfortable in supporting a candidate and supporting a philosophy that, you know, they maybe have not been given before. They may not have had any exposure to. And that is that it doesn't matter if you could be Republican. I'm a far right leaning, I shouldn't say far right, but I'm a right leaning libertarian. There are left leaning libertarians. I can have several beliefs that align with the Republican Party. You can have several beliefs that align with the Democrat Party. That's not the issue. The issue is that you advocate for those beliefs and try and create voluntary collaborations with others to achieve those ends, but you can't use the power of government to force people to those ends. And you have to be okay with people making their own decisions, both socially and economically, whether they would make a decision that you would disagree with. And most people do believe that. Most people do think that way. They just can't comprehend government not being able to force you to cooperate. It's a fundamental roadblock through generations of conditioning that the government is supposed to do all of these different things. And so that's a hard thing to overcome. But we have to get people to understand the non-aggression principle. That's where it all has to start. And to acknowledge that, yes, it's wrong to force people to do that. Once you can get a person to acknowledge that it's wrong to use force against somebody, once you can get somebody to acknowledge that forcing people to behave counter to their own desires is wrong, now you could start having a real conversation about reforming government. And that's going to lead you to much more productive conversations down the road with these people. If you can present your messaging in that way, that essentially the rules that would apply to an individual, nobody's going to say it's okay for one individual to force another individual to behave in a particular way. Once you get people to understand that we need to apply the rules of the individual to government, then your conversations become much easier. And there's a couple of things that you could do to make that happen. The first and the foremost is that it's odd when you're talking to somebody about government being allowed to use force as opposed to an individual not being allowed to use force. What you're essentially saying is a government that most people will also acknowledge is incredibly corrupt and really is not representative of the people anymore. Whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're both probably very unhappy with government as it is. Well, I think we all know that. That same government that you're unhappy with, that same government that you'll absolutely acknowledge is corrupt, is being given authority that you wouldn't give to your neighbor. You wouldn't allow your neighbor to use force to achieve his ends, even though you know your neighbor, you like your neighbor, you probably trust your neighbor. You know your government, you don't like your government, you don't trust your government, but for some reason it's okay for them to initiate force, but not the individual. We got to take the rules of the individual, who we hold in higher esteem than the government, and convince people that we need to start applying the rules of individual behavior to government, because we can't trust government. So that's one way to get people to start acknowledging, well, yeah, I wouldn't let an individual person do this. Why would I let a government that I don't trust, that I know is corrupt, do it? So to me, that's the first thing. And the second is the idea of volunteerism being able to solve problems. I think that's a major roadblock. And I'm going to get into each individual item as we go, as I go through the series of videos. So definitely, by the way, I didn't mention this at the beginning, please subscribe and hit the notifications. I'm going to be talking about volunteerism. You have to stop attacking it. I'm going to be talking about volunteerism and how it solves the problem of roads, how it solves the problem of schools, how it solves the problem of medical care, all these different topics that we have to have the government serving the commons to make these things happen. We have to use, the whole taxation stuff. We're going to get into that on each individual topic as the series of videos goes on. But like I said, we have to talk about the idea of volunteerism and what I usually use to break that conversation down initially is the fact that the person I'm talking to is saying that we need to do these things. They're saying we need to pay for schools, we need to pay for roads, we need to pay for infrastructure. People who are poor need help. We have to help with, we have to make sure people have access to medical care and all these different things. You are agreeing with all those things. As a libertarian, you believe all of those things. I also believe in the greater ability of humanity to provide those things on a voluntary basis. And the fact that the person that you're talking to and virtually everybody else you encounter is saying we need to pay for these things means that they don't need to be forced to pay for them. More importantly, that under a system of volunteerism, they're going to get the government that they want. Americans will get the exact amount of government. Americans will get the exact amount of government that they're willing to pay for. So right now, when you could get into the budget discussion and how the federal government is spending money, how much of that money is directed towards military activity versus the things that they're telling you that they pay taxes for, you can start breaking that down and say, look, if you were paying $1, or $1,000 or $10,000 a year in taxes, do you want 70% of that money going to the military? Or do you want 70% of that money going to schools? Do you want 70% of that money going to the military? Or do you want 70% of that money going to providing food for the needy or medical care for the needy? Because the government is consuming this money and they're not spending it in the way that you think they're spending it. They're not doing the things and the only reason they can get away with that, the only reason they can get away with taking your money and doing something other than what you want it to do is because they are able to take it by force. So that volunteerism not only will be a greater solution, will help provide for those things in a much more efficient manner, but that the use of force to extract that money is allowing the government to specifically not do those things. So that's kind of, and we can get into each one, like I said, as we go through the videos. We're going to be talking about schools and roads and the military and all these different things. But that's the other thing, is that people will pay for these things because they're already telling you that they need to be paid for. But that the idea that we are forcing people to pay for things, that the idea that we're being forced to pay taxes, is the reason government can mismanage our money so poorly. If they had to ask us for the money, they wouldn't be able to manage it so poorly. So we started having that conversation and moving things in that direction. And then the potential voter is going to start talking to you about specific issues. And once they start talking to you about specific issues, you're starting to win. Because now you've overcome the idea that of the strangeness of libertarianism, and you've shown that you have a practical knowledge of why that person is afraid of libertarianism, and you've been able to address their primary concerns, the things that turn them off the most about libertarianism, the reason that they've kind of shied away from it as a principle. So that's kind of, for me, this is, if you're going to start a campaign, these are the first kind of couple of things that you really should be getting into and engaging with. As we get into the season, you're going to go out, you're going to be collecting signatures and people are going to start asking you questions about libertarianism. And it's very important that you are ready to answer those questions in a way that is inviting, that's not condescending, and that invites more conversation. Okay, so now let's say you can get people to understand and at least agree in principle to the NAP. The very next thing to do is to ask them to vote for you. And it seems crazy that this has to be done, but the thing that separates a failed salesperson from a successful salesperson is to actually ask for the sale. Because you have to ask them to vote for you so you can really get back into their objections. And as libertarians, we know what those objections are going to be, right? There's two primary issues that always come up when you ask somebody to vote for you when you're a libertarian. One is you can't win. Why would I vote for you if you can't win? Let me explain to you what the absolute worst response to you can't win. I'd love to see a third party, right? This is what it really is I'd love to see a third party, but you can't win. And then your answer is always the same, right? Well, if all the people who wanted to see a third party voted for me, then I'd win. That's a terrible answer to that, because yeah, that's what winning is. If more people voted for me, I'd win. Duh, they know that. They're telling you that people aren't going to vote for you. And so don't come back with if more people voted for me, I'd win. It's a terrible, terrible answer to that question. The answer to that question is to acknowledge that. I know I'm going to lose this election. I know that I'm not going to win. It seems very counterintuitive to say, I know I'm going to lose. But it's important that you put that out there, because what you're going to show these people, what you're going to show these voters, is something that neither other party shows them. And that is that you are committing a selfless act. I'm running as a libertarian because I want your kids and my kids to be more free in the future. And even though I'm not going to win today, if I keep fighting the fight, I believe our movement will eventually grow. And so I'm running for you, for your kids, for my kids, for the next generation. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm not doing this because I'm going to seek power and get in this position. And even if I were to win, my principles are that government should be less powerful. Therefore, I don't have a lot of value to lobbyists. I'm not going to enrich myself by serving in the government. I'm going to leave my office in much the same financial condition that I entered it in. So I'm running for the good of others. And the fact of the matter is that I'm spending my time and my money to further a cause, not to serve myself. That's how you answer that question. You answer that question by showing that you are being a selfless person, and that's the reason that you're running as a libertarian. That's why you're running as a third party. People will ask you, if you're engaging in enough conversations, people are going to ask you, if you are a left-leaning libertarian, they're going to ask you why you're not running as a Democrat. And if you're a right-leaning libertarian, they're going to ask you why you're not running as a Republican. I got that question. And the answer is that I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, so I'm not going to run under those party banners. I'm not going to do that because I don't believe in what they believe in. At the very core of their party, even though I agree with a lot of their secondary beliefs, I don't agree with their core belief of it's okay to use government to force people to engage in that activity. So it would be a compromise of my belief system to run under those parties, even though it would increase my chances of winning. This is another act of selflessness, that you would rather lose and stand by your principles than win and compromise. That's appealing to voters. Saying that if more people voted for me, I'd win, what is that getting you? It's getting you nowhere. So answer that question with the truth. The truth shall set you free, right? That is the truth. That is why you're running as a libertarian. That's why you're running in general. It is primarily a selfless act where you are making sacrifices for what you believe is the greater good. And the other two parties just aren't able to sell that because it's not true in the case of the other two parties. And of course, the second is the fear-based response that's based on the duopoly. We all know it. We can't let the other guy win. And it usually comes with the wasted vote argument. And so a couple of things that we do wrong, in my opinion, is that we argue with the voting third party is a waste. They think that because voting for someone who has a chance to win validates the choice of their vote. At this point, you should probably have some ammunition. If you've had an engaged conversation with somebody who's asked you some of these questions, you have been able to talk to them for a while, you're going to have some information. And I think a major mistake that we make as libertarians is saying that the two parties are the same. I'm guilty of it. I think we're all very guilty of it. And you're offending both Republicans and Democrats by saying that. It's been a common message. You see it all over the internet that libertarians are, Republicans and Democrats are two wings of the same bird, two sides of the same coin. They're not. They don't view themselves that way. And so when you say that, they're not listening to you. You can't tell a Republican that he's the same as a Democrat. You're challenging the very core of what he thinks about himself. They're not listening to you once you say that. You tell them that they're the same as the people that and at this divisive political environment that we're in right now, you tell them that they're the same as the party they oppose. They're done. They're not listening to you anymore. You don't understand politics. You don't know how different these two parties are. That's the wrong way to approach this. When you're talking about the third party, it's not about the fact that the two parties are the same, because nobody's going to believe you when you say that. What you need to tell them is that government itself, no matter which party has been in control, has behaved in very much the same way. This deflects the blame away from their political party. It doesn't say that this is because Republicans are bad or Democrats are bad or whatever the case may be. What it's saying is that government as a whole has behaved in a very similar way, no matter what party has been in control. And that this can be framed as the two parties are being so diametrically opposed, even though we know that that's not necessarily the case, but they're so opposed that it's difficult to get anything accomplished. And what we get is watered down legislation full of compromises that doesn't make anybody happy. So instead of trying to sell the message that their parties are the same. What you're really selling is the fact that the parties are so different that nothing can get done in government. Everything's full of compromises. We're not getting anywhere. Once you get that message across, now they're listening, at least. Now you haven't turned them off. You haven't offended them. Now that you've got that message out, you could tell them that voting for a third party is the creation of competition, and competition makes things better. You want better Republicans and you want better Democrats. This is something that Larry Sharp said. If you want better Republicans and Democrats, you have to vote third party. You have to show the two parties that you're willing to walk away. Once you show them that, they'll improve. They'll put out a better product. They'll put out better candidates. Their candidates will be better because the third voice is starting to become louder and louder. So a vote for a third party is a vote to improve the two political parties as they are. And the best case scenario is that you start having third party candidates actually win, and they can do what? They can build a bridge between the two parties because they are a third voice that people don't automatically oppose. If you're a Republican, it's hard for you to listen to Democrats. If you're Democrats, it's hard for you to listen to a Republican. But as a Libertarian or a Green Party or a Constitution Party, people don't automatically shut off a third party voice. They're willing to listen a little bit more because they don't see themselves as so opposed. So by voting for and hopefully eventually getting some third party winners, you should be able to actually start bringing the country a little bit, back together, because you're going to have multiple voices and not just two diametrically opposed voices. So it's not a wasted vote. It's a vote for your party to improve, and it's a vote for a more cooperative government that is better at getting things done. So, and it operates more efficiently. So that's the answer to the wasted vote. Do not, I can't emphasize this enough, do not tell a Republican or a Democrat that they're exactly the same as a Republican or a Democrat, that you can't tell them that. It's incredibly offensive to them, and they're not going to listen to you after you say that. And we say that way too much. It's way too much of our messaging online is all the two parties are the same. That's a horrible way to approach people who hold some pretty solid beliefs in the variances between who they are and who the people they oppose are. So, I think that's good for today. The next video will be addressing a specific topic. I'm not 100% sure where I'm going to go next. Probably education. It could be roads. We all know the answers or the questions that come up. How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for that? If we're going to talk specifically about solutions and better ways to answer this, we can't just keep saying free market. We have to actually explain how this is going to work. So we have to be a party that presents actual solutions, not just says, oh, the free market will solve the problem. We have to actually present solutions. That's the way that I want to start putting my videos out. And I hope you find them helpful, particularly, like I said, if you are running as a libertarian, or if you just want to learn more about libertarianism. So go ahead and subscribe, hit the notifications for the new videos go up. I'm also going to make these available. I haven't been doing the podcast. I'm going to start making these all available on the podcast as well. So you can just listen to them in your car. That is, you can find me on Spotify, Brian for Liberty. It's Brian, the number 4 Liberty on Spotify. So when these go up on YouTube, they'll also go out on the podcast. So thank you very much for stopping by. Once again, hit the subscribe button. And as always, we will see you next time.